About trees in it's really great to be back in a room with real human beings. You guys don't know what you're missing out on. The commute, finding a parking spot, all those other things that make life so meaningful in Boston. But thanks, I'm really pleased to be here. We are missing our normal retreat, but we'll be back, I'm sure, next year. But I wanted to, the last year and a half have been, I would say, particularly intense for everyone, but they have had many meanings for the Arnold Arboretum. And I want to unpack a little bit of that, especially skewed towards some of the interests of the Institute here and environmental health and safety. So I'm just going to start with a simple question, what is an arboretum? And I think what you'll find is that you have a clue that arbor, maybe trees, and you could say it's a botanical garden of trees. And you'd be correct. I mean, it's a flavor of botanical gardens. There are other kinds of botanical gardens, but arboreta are really a unique set of gardens where woody plants are the centerpiece. But that's definition. What I'm going to say, and I realize that we're going to have a little bit of a cutoff with the slides. An arboretum is trees with provenance in the design landscape. And what I can tell you is I need to unpack that. But hopefully in unpacking that, we can begin to see some of the many meanings. Oh, that's great, yeah. Whoops, now we. Oh.
You got to click back on the slide.
Yeah,
there we go. All right, so I think everyone knows where we are, and we know where the Arboretum is. We're sort of the southern terminus of Harvard University in Boston, and we're just a couple of miles south of here along the Emerald Necklace. And
click the second. Click two lines. Yeah.
There you go.
There we go. And I want to have his mountain covered.
Okay.
Oh, so the smallest one.
I know. No, that's just nothing. Why is it showing Eileen and not?
She's the host.
Yeah. It's okay. Well, anyway, Eileen, you're up in front and center. And, you're giving a wonderful talk. So, congratulations. So let me just tell you a little bit about the Arnold Arboretum in its brief but important history. The land that the Arnold Arboretum sits on is old farmland. It was basically a lot of sheep there a couple hundred years ago. And a gentleman farmer by the name of Benjamin Bussey, who accumulated quite a bit of wealth as a merchant, ended up giving the land or promising the land in the 1840s to Harvard University. There's a Bussey professorship in the law school. I think there's a professorship in the divinity school. But nothing happened. The land just sat there until 1872 when James Arnold passed away. He was a whaling merchant in New Bedford, but he also had accumulated a lot of wealth, and he had great desires to have his landscape, just like Benjamin Bussey, enjoyed by the public. The idea of these beautiful pleasure grounds, which was something that people thought about. So his money came to Harvard. It was partnered with the land, and in 1872, Arnold Arboretum was born as the first public arboretum in North America. They appointed the first director, Charles Sprague Sargent. To give you some idea of how often this job turns over, I'm number 8. All right, 149 years, I'm the 8th director of the Arnold Arboretum.
Did you have to sign like a 20-year contract?
20, that's like...
I don't think I could last 20. But Sargent did 54, so he helped the average at the beginning. He immediately turned, though, in thinking about what the scientific museum of trees was going to be. He also wanted this to be part of an emerging park system that was going to be born in Boston. He turned to Frederick Law Olmsted, the great landscape architect, and he asked Olmsted to take on the design of the Arnold Arboretum. And for those of you who want to know a little bit about that, in designing it, he came up with plans that were so grand that there was no way Harvard could afford to build these plans. So they hatched an idea. It's an idea where it has only happened once in the history of Harvard University, probably once in the history of the city of Boston. They convinced Harvard to give something away. So they actually convinced Harvard to give all of the land to the city in perpetuity for $0.00. We would take a lease back on the land, and that lease is for 1,000 years. We send $1 downtown every year by check. And it's a renewable lease, so we are very young. We've still got 1,861 years to go as a formal institution with an agreement with the city of Boston. Now, what did the Arnold Arboretum get from the city of Boston? Boston owns the hardscape. They build all the roads, they build all the stone walls, they build the steam shovels and the crews that moved earth and created this landscape, all of that was paid for and continues to be the responsibility of the city of Boston. And when someone falls off a bicycle on a nice road of ours and breaks their arm, and their lawyer sends me something, I just send it downtown. It's a very good situation. Now, Harvard actually controls the property. This is a formal Harvard campus. So this is all Harvard people. There are about 70 of us out there, some of the finest horticulturists in the world. They're up in the trees. We have a fleet of equipment. As you know, every tub on its own bottom. We rely exclusively on endowment payout. There's no budget from Harvard University per se, and there's no annual budget from the city of Boston. This is an entirely philanthropic enterprise. The city continues to maintain the walls. I give them a call when something collapsed. Last year, they put quite a bit of money into the repair of these beautiful stone walls. They do law enforcement through park rangers. And so we actually have they're there a little bit at the time, and then we've supplemented with our own sort of new program, which is the Arboretum Ambassadors for lost kids and things like that. All daylight hours, there's a number to call. If you're at the Arboretum and anything goes wrong, we'll find you. So it's an amazing institution, born really of the sort of vision of Charles Sprague Sargent, Frederick Law Olmsted, and a moment in Boston's history when cities like Boston were asking the question, how does one, aspirationally speaking, become a great city? This is when the MFA was born. This is when the great institutions that turned Boston into what it is. So it was a building phase. It's very different than what we live with today. There's nothing you can compare this to. It's a unique part of the city's history. So let's talk about a design landscape. And as I mentioned, here's the Arnold Arboretum here. Ultimately, Frederick Olmsted would design what's called the Emerald Necklace. The terminus is Franklin Park, the largest park in the Emerald Necklace. Here's the Arnold Arboretum, all the way back to the back fence. But this was really the first park to be incorporated into this incredible set of green spaces that were meant to really be an interface between people who lived in Boston and access to nature in an urban environment. And you can see some of the early plans. This is not exactly the road layout, but beautiful Olmstedian curves. He really knew how to read the topography. And you can see down here, Frederick Law Olmsted, a landscape architect. So a public ground to include the Harvard Arboretum. So we are, in a sense, a unique hybrid institution. It's a collaboration between Harvard and the city of Boston. And I don't work for the city of Boston, but I actually run a park in the city of Boston's park system. So it's everything there are no rules. We have to work together. I have wonderful partners in the city, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Oops, get this to go. So Olmsted didn't live long enough to see this old sheep pasture turn into a set of giant, beautiful trees. He died at a point when many of the trees would have been, more than saplings. They might have been 20, 30 feet tall. But he knew what you and I would be seeing over a century later. That is the genius of Olmsted. You are going to walk in a blizzard and look into the pine collections, and you are going to be dumbstruck by the beauty and the colors, the sense of these trees that were planted during Olmsted's lifetime, but only now are reaching their sort of mature phases. You come back the next day, you come around one of those Olmstedian curves, a reveal, and then you're looking into the blue skies and the spruces and the firs. We're laid out taxonomically, so you can think about going to the MFA. If you went into one room, you would have a feeling because you're around Renaissance painting. You go to another room, and it's a different type of art, and you feel differently, right? You're responding, let's say, to modern sculpture. Well, this collection of firs and spruces really feels different when you're there because of the architecture of the plants than the pine collection, the oak collection, totally different feel. This is a museum, and our rooms don't have walls. But as you go through, what you are doing is you're experiencing what Sargent and Olmsted wanted you to experience, the intensification of being in the finest collections of various groups of woody plants. You come back in the spring, and this is the crabapple collection on Peters Hill, one of the finest crabapple collections in the world. The world's expert on crabapples, Beijing Botanic Garden, she comes here when she wants to do a lot of work to get the standards done. In the fall coming up, you're going to have the hickory collections glowing at the top on the low angles. And maybe you'll wander by this magnificent mutant form of a European beech. It's a twisted beech. We got it from Kew in 1888. It was collected in the wild in the 1880s in France. It's a natural genetic mutation that lives as a subpopulation in beech forests. And we've been taking care of it ever since. It's a magnificent organism. But the bottom line is, without any signage, without me saying this is how you should feel, Olmsted and Sargent are able to elicit a cartwheel, a smile, a family just sitting on the ground. They are able to elicit a feeling. And we'll come back to what that feeling means in terms of health outcomes, but make no mistake, this is intentional. If we do our job right, if we do great horticulture, we are going to be improving the lives of everyone on the grounds. Briefly, 281 acres, bigger than the entire campus of Harvard and Cambridge. Over 16,000 museum objects curated woody planting sessions, roughly 2,100 species. It might be, I don't know, 100 species of woody plants in Massachusetts. So that's a lot more. We are collecting around the world. We have an herbarium of press sheets that say where plants have existed of 1.5 million records with the plant material on it. We've done a lot of exploration in Asia, and we have incredibly important archives. Visual archives, you can go on Hollis and look up. There's cultural history there, much of which was lost through warfare, revolution, cultural revolutions. Same, we have images from what is now North Korea from the early 1900s. So these aren't just botanical expeditions, we also carry home cultural information from our hosts. And as I said, there are about 70 of us there. Every plant is actually got a tag at the bottom, but if you pulled out your phone, you could pull all 16,000, hit a dot, pull up a plant record. This is the most sophisticated curatorial system of any botanical garden in the world. It is powerful beyond anything. I have full-time programmers. I have 4 full-time IT staff just to manage our plant records. It's an amazing thing. And so if you want to know how many Oyama magnolias we have, you just type that into our Arboretum Explorer. It gives you the list. It pulls all our images. It serves everything. It's really an amazing thing, very open system. So the design, you can see, is intentional. It is laid out with a great set of sort of expectations of how we will feel. Now let's talk about provenance. So this is a nice sand pear. It's a different domestic, it eventually is domesticated in Asia. They're a little bit grittier and they have cell structure, it's kind of cool. But it's in flower in the spring and it's gorgeous. You can see white flowers. And I like taking pictures. I probably put up 12 or 13,000 of my images live on our plant database. You can use them in classrooms, whatever you like. Beautiful flowers. But I could go to Home Depot and buy a sand pear that's commercially produced by the gazillions, take a pretty similar picture. So what's different about this sand pear and the one at Home Depot? It's provenance. And when I say provenance, I mean, look at the tag. We know the family, we know it's binomial, we know it was collected as a seed in 1908 in China, in the wild, by Ernest Henry Wilson. Not only that, I know it was collected in Hubei province. It was collected a little bit west of Yichang. We have photographic archives that Wilson took, glass plate negatives of Yichang, and you can see the river and all the commercial trade and activity. We know who he went out with on these long expeditions. You had experts in local plants. You had people who were translators. You had people who were carrying stuff. This was, for example, 1908, and this was basically a 300-mile expedition. This is filled with seeds. So imagine a sand pear you come across west of Yichang. You pull a fruit off, and you're going to pull many fruits off it. That evening, probably you're going to clean all the pulp off. You're going to pull all the seeds out to let them dry. Then you're going to put them in a packet. That packet's going to get wrapped, and moved. A few months later, you get back to your headquarters, which looked like this. This is the Harvard. That was Wilson's headquarters. And this stuff then has to move from inland down to the coast on a river, cross the Pacific Ocean on some sort of a ship, cross the United States on the railroad. It arrives in Boston. It's unpacked at the Arnold Arboretum, and our propagators now go to work on coaxing that seed to life. So it arrives in 1908, and probably 4 years later, it's of size to be planted. Someone digs a hole, and for the next century, whatever, we take care of that unique genetics that was collected in the wild in that place from China. So provenance is about museum objects. It's about the same thing that you and I have as organisms. We have standing, we have provenance, we have a history, we know where we came from, we know our life story. That's very different than being a so-called Home Depot human being with nothing other than a commercial. We wouldn't. So you should really relate to these organisms just as you relate to other humans. They have history, and that's a very important part of giving these organisms standing. And it's been there, mapped, you can see right now, a very sophisticated mapping for quite a long time. So it's a museum of living objects. And when I got here, we weren't doing a lot of collecting. And any museum that's not aspiring for more and better is sort of a strange place to be. So I spent years developing a set of plans with colleagues and people from around the country to really get us back into business. And the pandemic shut us down, but basically, pandemic aside, we're out in the field 3 or 4 times a year collecting. Sometimes we'll fly, just for one species to Japan at the right time to get this rare and endangered species. We have a long list of what we're after, about 400 species around the world. Our hotspots are China, Japan, and Korea. And the reason is that's where the most diversity of temperate woody plants lives. Now, why is it more diverse than North America, which is pretty diverse, but mostly in the Southeast? And why is Europe such a terrible place to go for woody plants? It's an interesting evolutionary story. There are many bits and pieces we understand, but it certainly means there's been greater sort of speciation and diversification here, or lower rates of extinction. But I will tell you, a lot of the northeastern woody plant flora is a disjunct, meaning it's derived through biogeographic dispersal events over the last 40 million years. A chunk of the material that you would see in the northeastern US, if I set you down in Hubei province in the right spot, you would almost think you're in New England. They have close relatives. So a lot of the closest relatives of New England woody plants are actually here, here, and here. And they just have been dispersing. We've dispersed backwards too, so there's some North American material that's made its way, but mostly it's been the other direction. So we get to go to places like this incredible national park, Huanglong Nature Preserve, and it's actually up at the top of Sichuan province, and these are the mineral pools that flow down the side. We have ingredients no one else in the world has to collect there. We work with our Chinese colleagues regularly because there's a lot of conservation work that needs to be done. The paper bark maple, which we brought to North America in 1907 as a seed, is threatened and endangered in China. So we're very much an international organization. We are working with the peoples of the world. We go to Japan, we have amazing stories. And along the way, we really begin to continue these relationships that are deep relationships with our host countries. And importantly, what we also do is we invite everyone to come over here. And this is just right before everything shut down in the Appalachians. We spent 3 weeks with our colleagues from Beijing Botanical Garden, Chengdu, and Kunming, bringing them to get some of the best of our North American material into gardens in China. And so it's really an amazing thing to be together and be in the field and be collecting winged elm or whatever it is. And we reciprocate. As a consequence, these are the finest holdings of woody plants in the world. You might be able to name a few maple species: sugar maple, red maple, Japanese maple, right? Well, there are about 140 species in the world of maple, most in Asia. Some are subtropical and tropical. We couldn't grow them here. You can't see the number, but I can tell you at the Arnold Arboretum, when you go into our maple collection, you'll be surrounded by 70 species of maples. Now imagine you go into a room, a gallery of art, and you want to see, maybe it's an individual artist and the various periods of that artist, or it's a type of art and you want to see the different representations. That's what's going on when you walk into our maple collection or our hickory collection. You're experiencing an intensification that allows you then to really see the breadth of diversity. So 70 species of maple, but we're also a biodiversity hotspot in the city of Boston. Beyond our amazing collections, for example, we had a Harvard College honors student do a thesis and found over 70 species of native bees live at the Arnold Arboretum. So we are constantly thinking about how to drive biodiversity up, not just with our plants, but with insect declines that we've been reading about worldwide. We are doing everything we can to promote that. We're reintroducing extirpated plants from Boston, things that have been extinct in Boston. They may be somewhere else, but the city we just reintroduced something that hasn't been seen since the 1930s in Boston. It's on the grounds in flower right now. Collected local germplasm nearby, brought it to size, it's in flower. First time in 100 years that plant species has been in Boston. We have about 7% of our plants are basically conservation value. We're holding on to genetics. Franklinia, which is in flower right now, you shouldn't miss it. It's a gorgeous member of the tea family. It's been extinct in the wild for 2 centuries. It only exists in gardens. And if it wasn't for gardens, it wouldn't even exist. So we do all of that. And of course, we're part of Harvard, and I'm a professor in the Department of Organismic and Evolutionary Biology. I opened up this magnificent new research building, which we normally have our meetings in. And that really was a game changer. It got us back into the business of being able to work in the collections, be on equipment 5 minutes later, and be, whether it's extracting DNA, doing imaging, whatever it is, we can do all of that. We are. So it's been a game changer. I'm one of 3 faculty who are based at the Arboretum. We have a number of independent scholars on endowed postdoctoral fellowships. A lot of climate change research is now going on in the collections. Probably 70% of the research is climate change. If you look up, sometimes you may see drones flying around. And what are they doing? They're actually getting color signatures off the plants to actually look at pumps of chlorophyll in and out for phenological research, for finding out when plants wake up each year related to climate change or global change. We also pulse that out into the community. Really importantly, we don't just do science. My graduate students, our postdoctorals, our scientists are doing public programming from Head Start all the way through to Boston Public School Teachers Institutes in the summer. And so education and public outreach are hugely important, especially in a city where many of the children, especially the children who are often in public schools, don't have the benefits of some of the private schools. We are their introduction to nature. And it is a hugely important thing to acclimate, become comfortable and joyful in nature at a very early age. We try to share with the community in the world as much as we can. The programs obviously shut down in person with the pandemic, but in a funny way, we learned something really great. We should never be doing stuff only in a room. And here we are today with this hybrid. Instead of having 80 people come do something or we do something on the grounds with 35, I did stuff with the art museums you'll see in a minute. We would have 600, 700 people around the world online for programming on the grounds of the Arnold Arboretum. It was a game changer. We redid our entire website. It's like no other garden in the world. We are here to tell stories and give representation to plants. You can take my tour or the Keeper of the Living Collections tour. Many of you know about my posts from the collections where I photograph and just blast something out. But we're here to give voice to nature. It's really an important part of what we do. But we're also about the intersection of human diversity and biodiversity. So we partner with the art museums, their Painting Edo exhibition, which was spectacular. Unfortunately, everything got shut down just after it opened. Well, then we went online and I worked with the curator of Asian art to do programming around their painting of a Japanese black pine and our Japanese black pine. And to unpack what is in that painting and what it means in terms of representation of that tree, we had 600 people online for that. My director's lecture series was about the pecan, but it really wasn't about the pecan. It was about the pecan and food history as America's nut. And it's sort of an interesting thing because most of our domesticated fruits are not American domesticates, they're from Europe and Asia. We had Robin Wall Kimmerer, a Native American professor who's a botanist, a very fine botanist, who wrote a book that has been a bestseller, but on the Council of Pecans, about the interaction between Native peoples and pecans and her family history. Taya Miles, who's here at Harvard, spoke of the heartbreaking story that she just published a book on of a young enslaved girl who is being sold away from her mother, who gets a sack, some keepsakes, including 3 handfuls of pecans. So using the pecan, we interrogated so many aspects of biodiversity and human diversity. So it isn't just about us telling you what a pecan is. We can use that in ways that really, I think, give voice to many other aspects of the intersection between humans and plants. Right now, going on with the American Repertory Theater, if you go out there, there's a whole digital experience for children, adults, young people who are teenagers. It's called the Arboretum Experience. You just flash your thing in a QR code and they'll set you up. So we've been working with ART over the years to do quite a few things. Okay. Now you can't see this, unfortunately. So what the title says is Environmental Justice at the Arnold Arboretum. It's okay, no big deal, unless you can get rid of it. That's
move it to the side. Can you move it to the side? I think if I could, there's a way of having it.
Oh, well, doesn't matter. It's environmental justice at the Arnold Arboretum. So this is what I want to really finish up talking about because of being at the School of Public Health and the National Institute. Wow, you guys are great. This is really important. It's something I've been working on, we've been working on for years. We can't just talk about the pandemic in a vacuum. We have to talk about all of 2020. The racial reckoning, the fact that what we know, oftentimes that we don't think necessarily enough about how to make it actionable, and how do we translate what we really confronted in the spring and on into something concrete at a public institution that is free and open to everyone. So in theory, no one should ever feel like they can't go. But I know for a fact, with some very hard conversation, that not everyone feels the same way that an older white male feels on crossing a threshold into the Arnold Arboretum. That's just not a reasonable expectation. But now, how do we attack that problem? Well, let me just, oops. Here, there we go. Well, first of all, let's just start by saying the Arnold Arboretum, I gave you a whole bunch of different glimpses of the Arnold Arboretum, but I want to start with a very clear statement. The Arnold Arboretum is a public health institution. It is part of the healthcare network and system in Boston, period. Now, that's not what people think maybe in general about us, but I want to be very clear. We are a public health institution. And we know that we're a public health institution because, of course, during the pandemic, a lot of people came to stay healthy mentally, of course, with all the physical benefits too. We've seen major deficit disorder written up. We've seen all kinds of evidence, and we'll get to some of that in a minute. So we are a public health institution. And if you look, for example, this is a review paper of access to nature and the health benefits, better sleep, reduced ADHD, lower blood pressure, reduced obesity, better eyesight, improved immune function. And then I just wanted, Gary's group and Sarah and Sheila, who did an amazing 80-page report on the health benefits of urban nature, so dialing it in a little bit more, gave this case statement to me. I've shared it with the provost of Harvard University. I have shared it with high-level city officials. We have to make sure people who fund parks, and I'm going to be meeting with the Bloomberg Initiative folks to make sure we're part of every mayor's visit. You cannot fund a park as an amenity. You have to fund it as part of your healthcare system. And if you think of it that way, you are going to think very differently about the dollars that go into an institution like this. And the amount of benefit that you're getting is just off the scale. So again, you can see this report with references, and it runs 120 pages. And when I got it, I just read through it. I just thought, how can we take this and make this something that Harvard and the city of Boston and every mayor in this country understands? That's part of what I'm thinking hard about. But when we began the pandemic, every botanical garden and arboretum in the country and the world, almost every one of them closed. They closed because they weren't sure what to do, and it was a little scary, but they also didn't think of themselves as an essential part of healthcare in a pandemic. I, however, felt that we were unable to close. We had to figure out how to remain open. And I turned to Joe Allen and Mark Lipsitch because they were doing a lot of the talking about these topics. I said, let's get an op-ed piece out there. We went to the Washington Post and we said, keep these open. Now there's some gardens with really teeny trails, like Garden in the Woods. If you've been there in Framingham, you can't pull that out. But many gardens could. They just weren't. And what I can tell you is the New York Times picked this up, and they said it was the Arnold Arboretum who set an example for New York City in making sure that in the midst of this pandemic, people had these resources for well-being. So, the bottom line is how you conceive of yourself can have a huge impact on how you behave in a crisis. Everyone at the Arboretum, even if they were scared to come to work, knew they had to come. That it wasn't about themselves, that it was about something bigger than themselves. And let me just tell you, we have all these open access points. There's no turnstile, there's no money that changes hands. One gate by the visitor center since March 31st, when we turned on the counter, to just this July, 1.1 million visits. Now, I have another 19 entrances. So let's estimate 4 or 5 million visits. Now, some people are every day, some people are once a year, but we're talking millions of people have benefited from this institution during this pandemic, during all of the intensification, our threat and assault on democracy, racial reckoning, and of course, the virus. This is where people went. And they continue to go. We're monitoring the numbers now year over year. They're sticking, and now they're going up. People's attitudes have become much more respectful of the institution and the place. The scofflaws with dogs off leash have almost entirely disappeared. It is a different relationship, and it's because of this. We bought demographic information, and it's really encouraging. That doesn't mean we can't do better, but nearly half of the people on our grounds in 2019 were people of color. It is a very diverse set of audiences that you see, as Olmsted intended, mixing in a democratic sort of pillar of Boston. People mix, they see each other, you give recognition, and it is diverse. So we want to do more. We want to reach more people. We're working with everything from the MBTA to Boston Parks and Recreation Department to transportation, you name it. Every city agency is a partner of the Arboretum. But here's an interesting case study. I want to just say, so Boston did, they announced this, but basically this Trust for Public Land, they look at maps and they try to figure out, which cities are doing well giving people access to nature in urban areas. And they said, wow, Boston is amazing. Everyone lives within a 10-minute walk to a park. And in general, that's probably mostly true. But I'm going to give you a case study that actually I'm dealing with right now. And this is the Arnold Arboretum. There's our visitor center up there, which has been closed since the pandemic began. This is a railroad line from the 1840s, a spur line out to Roslindale and beyond. This is the Amtrak line. Yes, it lives between two railroad lines in general. People who have less, and we're going to explore that. So here's an entrance from this neighborhood into the Arnold Arboretum. It's actually a pedestrian portal under the railroad tracks from the 1840s. And let me tell you about the demography of this neighborhood. This is a 2010 census, but 0 to 25,000 is the median income census in this area, right next to the Arnold Arboretum. Free to everyone, should be an amazing part. People who are under-resourced should be able to go there. Well, let's see how they get there. So here's this, what I call the Iron Triangle, because of the railroad lines. Here's this 6,000 people, many of them young. And if you live about 100 feet from the Arnold Arboretum, and you want ADA access, like a sidewalk, I don't know, not asking too much. There isn't a sidewalk. There's actually a street here, but there's never been a sidewalk built on that street. Interesting, isn't it? The street is about 375 years old, but no one ever put a sidewalk. And that person has to, for ADA access, walk 20 minutes up a steep hill here just to get to our entrance. And if you're working 3 jobs and you are a single parent, this is not going to be a very fair way to say that you have access. You don't have access. So let me just show you what we're doing about this. For the last 8 years, I've been working on a set of plans to open up 2 portals from this neighborhood in Roslindale, one on the street and one on this pedestrian access. Then create new path systems that are all ADA compliant and will actually give these neighbors a way in. Now, you might say, why didn't the Arboretum do any of this before? Well, this land only came to the Arboretum 25 years ago. Remember, we don't own the hardscape. The MBTA owns that entrance. The city of Boston owns that entrance. And the MBTA actually controls what's over it. So all of it has to be a negotiation, and we have great city partners we're working. 3 public housing developments are right here next to Arnold Arboretum. So the first step is going to happen this spring. This is what it looked like. This is an old postcard from the early 1900s that someone took. There's this beautiful portal. This was not part of the Arboretum, but in the background was the Arnold Arboretum. You can see cows and pasture, a couple of kids. It looks beautiful. So you must say, why aren't people using it today? Well, this is what it looks like today. All right. It's covered with graffiti, broken glass. Occasionally you get the odd box spring. There's no maintenance. And it's, the reality is the MBTA cannot maintain individual park entrances. So we worked out something with the city to actually get a full set of build design and permit plans. This is what it's going to look like next year. And then the MBTA will assign the city control of certain aspects of the property for the construction. And the city will then assign an agreement with me on behalf of Harvard University to maintain. So it will remain pristine, and we will plan. But what a difference that will make to the 6,000 people who live in this neighborhood. And I just met with various officials in the city, everyone from the chief of energy, environment, and open space to, you name it. There's a lot of players involved. It's going to happen. And I'm really excited. So that will actually create an at-grade path that then gets you into the main part of the Arboretum where all of our living collections are. So wonderful. So now you can live here and go into the Arboretum, ADA compliant, push a baby carriage, whatever you like. The next phase that we're planning is this next link here to get you to the Peters Hillside. And this is very complicated because of the grade. We actually have to build above grade. And we thought, well, what could we do with that that might be pretty interesting? The answer is, I turned to two designers, Rosetta Elkin, who was at the GSD, and Keel Mo, who does a lot of sustainability of wood and has worked with us. And now we're looking over the train line. There's the pedestrian gate that's going to access the point that's going to be redone. And there's going to be a path that way. And then what's going to happen is we're going to go at grade, and then we're going to soar into the canopies of the trees with the Olmsted curves reflected, not duplicated. It's not meant to be a 19th century structure. It's a modern structure that has reflections off of our history. Pull-offs for classes in an urban wild, which is what this is. And then we land you right there, and you can go right into the Arboretum. We will use only locally grown wood, black locust, which actually is, you don't have to treat it, it lasts 70 years. And that means sustainability-wise, it's our carbon dioxide that we're capturing and putting in there, not someone else. It's not a tropical tree species or something like that. So here are some of the pictures. I've got to raise a huge amount of money for this. Don't get me wrong. I'm working on it, but I'm sure we're going to get through. Each step builds on the next step, a previous step. And there will be a time when actually one of the most exciting parts of Boston's park system will be right within 2 blocks of public housing in their neighborhood. And you think about that, that's an important and symbolic thing. So this is what we're aiming for, lifting you into the air with this beautiful light structure. So let me just add another thing that's come out of the pandemic. We closed the visitor center, so I've got all these employees who work on visitor engagement. They're wonderful people. We have bilingual interpreters. And well, we could have just said nothing, but everyone said we're going to get out there, we're going to pitch tents outside, on nice days, and we're going to meet people at the gates. So now you flip it around and you say, so for how long did I and my predecessors accept that this is how you met us? If you lived here, you first of all had to go 20 minutes around to get here. Then you had to walk a mile to meet a visitor engagement staff person who could hand you a map. That's really not okay. I accept full responsibility, but there are these things that the pandemic has shaken up. And I think when it comes again to the idea of public health and well-being, there are many good outcomes of this kind of thing. This is one. So this is not open again. And I'll tell you, this is the people, here are people out there meeting our guests at the gate, greeting them, telling them they're welcome, we're happy you're there, here's something to go see. And being built right now is our mobile visitor center. We will be rolling that out 3 days a week to different parts of the Arboretum on a schedule. This is last week. It's in the shop still, being built here locally in Massachusetts with our wood on the sides. It's weatherproof every season. If you want to be out there in January, we'll be out there in January. But we can now go to every single portal. That is a fundamentally different model of how we do spatial equity and environmental justice. So next year is our 150th anniversary, and I just want you to know, since we last gathered, I would say whatever it was, 2 years ago now, we have been working really hard. We have 3 things that are really central. We're going to renew our founding public promise of environmental justice. The words Olmsted would have written would sound very, 19th century, but the intention of those words is what we embody in environmental justice and spatial equity with our modern terminology. We are doubling down on our research on climate change, and we are combating extinction through our collecting efforts around the world. And we're trying to make sure we embed ourselves in the lives of every generation beyond. So those numbers are really important to us. We're getting new people to come to the Arnold Arboretum. So it's about biodiversity, but it's also about human diversity, the next century and beyond. And that's the community entrances. It won't just be this one entrance. In 5 years, I hope to have every entrance renovated. They went from carriageways to parking lots without anyone thinking about it. The car took over. They are going to be returned to pedestrian priority and bicycle priority. It's going to be this mobile visitor center, and it's going to be this incredible boardwalk as a destination. And as far as climate change, I'll just quickly tell you, we're built at the beginning of climate change, but no one knew about it until recently. We have no irrigation until 2 years ago. We don't need to water every day, but when you have a drought like we did 5 years ago, the place shuts down, we water by hand with fire hoses and fire hydrants. It's a disaster, and we lose material. So we have $5.5 million of plumbing we have to install. And basically, it's like if the MFA, if their HVAC system broke, and you said, well, let's just open up the windows, don't worry about it, right? You say that's insane. Well, our climate control system is the planet Earth around us, and it's broken, and we've got to get water everywhere. We've got to get more staffing because of all of the invasives and pests that are coming our way, and we need to do even more research in the collections to model out the future of this Earth in terms of woody plants. I'll just tell you, we're the leading edge of sustainability. Largest solar panel systems at Harvard are at the Arnold Arboretum. We are now almost a third of our electricity, including a science building with hoods, is generated by the sun. And I'll just come back to Olmsted in 1881. He gave this speech in Boston when he was trying to promote the idea that we should build a park system. The main object and justification is simply to produce a certain influence in the minds of people, and through this to make life in the city healthier and happier. That is public health. That's why I want to tell you how much I appreciate the chance to talk to all of you today. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Yeah, that was amazing. And our residents.
Go back to Zoom.
And I'm trying to figure out how to get it back. Where is it? Grid.
Yeah, hit grid. Should bring that.
No, I think we're. I think I've got to go back. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Bottom left for Zoom. Yeah. Oh no, not.
Or just
there you go. There you go.
Stop sharing.
Oh, you have to stop sharing.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
Yep. Thank you.
I always forget there's this button.
Teamwork. So now I think one, you
Nice.
should just know you have a lot of, if you want to click the chat, you got a lot of thank yous and shout outs from people who love the Arboretum and just wanted you to see it because it's very
Yeah, I definitely want to see that. I like to know people like the Arboretum. Question.
Can I ask a question? I love this. This is great. One of the questions I had was about the boardwalk, which seems beautiful, but I wondered if you've engaged with the local community and talked with them about what they actually want.
Yeah.
Because I know we talk about this a lot with like green gentrification, like not engaging with the community, giving them the amenities or necessities that they're looking for, as opposed to, some higher up, the landscape architect has beautiful designs, but isn't going to be used by the community. So I'm just wondering.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And the old way of doing business, which is you had an idea, and then you built it, and then you said, come on over. It's just not the way you do it. So we are, I've just reorganized our public programs. We're in the process of interviewing for a new addition to public programs, head of public programs. His or her charge is going to be to build these community relations from the ground up. We have met the managers of each of the public housing developments. They're good people. They can help us message. They can help us in terms of community engagement around meetings. It's not about, the structure is really secondary. What's really important is we've been doing a lot of our programming really from one locus, and we need to be doing the programming for children's ed. The things that are really important where we engage families, we need to be all over the property. And to do that, you have to actually build relationships with real families and with communities. So I can tell you that it has to, it won't, again, the structure is a means to get people somewhere that benefits them in the ways that the Arboretum is designed to do. But I think we have not had those deeper relations. We had it with certain schools nearby, and I think those have been very good. We're building new relationships with different schools, starting to build some middle school, and we're looking at high school initiatives now. But you're Olmsted and Sergeant just cooking something up and saying, let's do it. Actually, even if you could do it, it would be a bad way to do it. So completely agree.
So I actually have, sorry, I have a couple questions. Jump in on it. So the first one relates to those portals and openings, and I think I've talked with Gary about some. I can't remember whether it was that Green Space and Health compendium that they put together, Gary's group put together. Was that the thing that was partly relevant for convincing people in Boston and others that this was important to do for that community, or was there other efforts that they were helping with? And I just want to hear from you, like how that played out to sort of convince the people that needed convincing that creating those portals into those generally lower socioeconomic status sections of Boston was important.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. I've actually used that document. There's a thing in many universities called Nature RX with social prescription, and I am disappointed and remain disappointed that Harvard doesn't have it. I certainly would like us to be able to, in fact, I'm building it with Boston University right now. We're probably going to have a little bit of a test run this year with 4 different Arboretum days for their honors college. And they're closer, which makes it a little bit easier. But I would say in general, that document, I've been trying to use it to help me articulate the case to public officials, elected officials, appointed officials, people within universities. For example, when I was talking again with Boston University last week, I'm not referencing all 120 pages, but I'm an evolutionary plant biologist. This is not my area, so I want to make sure that I can speak with facts and a case statement. But to get this stuff done is incredibly complicated. And as you know, the city has changed over quite a bit in the last few months. I have a whole new team of people I have to interact with. So my job is to invite every one of these new people who are some of them are phenomenally interesting people. I just don't know them yet. But I've been out in my golf cart for hours at a time with various people, elected officials, people who are in a position to actually affect change. And it's been really, sort of encouraging. Everyone's coming together. You've got to get Boston Transportation involved. You've got to have Boston Public Works build the sidewalks. You've got to have Boston Parks manage the construction on our grounds. You've got to have the MBTA actually, their real estate division and another division, their engineers. And one by one, if you just sort of keep hanging in there, finally, slowly, it comes together. And so, but I think it's really important for, as I say, I think it's important for us to really make sure we're clear about public health benefits. And I don't, we already exist. Literally, that's what we were built to do. The barriers are getting to us. So, but I think people see it in there.
And then my other question was a more botanical one, because you referenced the fact that a lot of stuff comes from China, Japan, South Korea, because of that's the biggest, richest biodiversity for temperate woody plants.
Yeah.
So I assume you're somewhat limited because of the climate here in Boston. And I just wonder what is in your thinking about plants and species that would unfortunately probably not thrive in Boston? Is it just that's not what the Arboretum does? It's meant to be ones that are in this temperate zone, or what's your thinking about the rest of the world's species?
Well, we don't grow a lot of tropical stuff. That's fair to say. Nothing from Australia. I think there's maybe a species we might be able to dial in. The Southern Hemisphere is just tough for us. You can get up in elevation, but then they don't like the wet summers, and so you can get cold tolerance, but it's just tough. South America, there's probably a half dozen things we'll eventually get out. Mm-hmm. But here's the other thing. You can't predict what will survive in Boston. So the Torrey pine, which is the most endangered pine in North America, is found in one population north of San Diego, for Torrey pines. All right, someone brought back some seed 30-something years ago. And we propagated and we put it out. It's still there. Now, you might ask, why would something from San Diego, we wouldn't grow a palm tree? You have to remember how dynamic where trees are right now. 16,000 years ago, there was still an ice sheet above us. There were no trees here. Then what you have is these velocities of species moving forward as the glaciers retreat. But there are plenty of things that didn't move. For whatever reason, they got stuck. Literally, they never got back to where they were. So the Franklin tree is one of them. It's from the state of Georgia. This should be pretty tough on it. The Torrey pine, we know from the fossil record, was all the way up to Oregon before the last glacial max. So what you'll find is where it comes from doesn't necessarily tell you whether it'll live in Boston. So we're constantly pushing those margins. And the way we do the experiment is we plant it. We know where the warmest cold spots are. We have all the local sort of temperature information. And then the other thing is what didn't work a century ago might work now. So we're going back. We have all the plant records. If something got nuked by, actually, for example, if you have a few years ago, we had a 60-year record low. We lost a couple of things, every one of that species. I would just go get more of it. We come back and it's back, all right? So, if every 20 years you lose something, you can get more of it, no big deal. So we grow stuff that won't necessarily survive the worst, but the climate change has made it very interesting. So we're doing a lot of genetic work in terms of collecting along southern margins of species, because those are going to actually go extinct. Even if the species is roving, things are changing. Yeah.
So are there opportunities to think about public health surveillance in these areas, in your Iron Triangle versus Jamaica Hills, for example, and looking at the differences in health in some sense and how that changes after you put these portals in?
Well, that's kind of why I'm so excited to be here today. I would put it to all of you. I think it's an amazing opportunity right in our own backyard to really study the situation. And a lot of these studies around access to nature, they can be very general. They can be very much access to nature or seeing nature, but I think my read of these of these studies is that very specific studies where you have a space that you've got the same distance, the same space, and you have two different populations, could really provide very powerful sort of metrics around what happens when you do and don't have access. So I would just put it to everyone here. At the Arnold Arboretum, we would be thrilled if people did this.
What is the target date for opening those portals being?
Well, the first one, the underpass, yesterday I was promised, they didn't get it going this fall, but they're thinking it'll be a spring construction, meaning that we won't have that portal open until next summer at the best, probably. And then, the rest is longer term.
Spring NIEHS pilots.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, in fact, what better moment to go right in there, especially with the lockdown, because you have the additional burden of people being locked down, and it's not just public housing over there. You've got the 3-deckers, you've got it's a light industry kind of place. So you have really interesting demography. There's a fair amount of Spanish folk in there, so you've got Latinx population, you've got a variety of other sort of things in the mix. So amazing opportunities. We work with one of the elementary schools just beyond that, on the edge of that neighborhood. We have programming in that school. So yes, I think it's right by the iron time. Yes.
Kind of a two-part, simple question to the point that you just made about language diversity. And so you made mention of the app. And so I was just curious about the availability of different languages for that. But my other question is, with respect to this particular point, one of the things that I'm just curious about is how providing access could change the dynamic of the neighborhood with respect to gentrification. I know you mentioned about working with various city planners and so on. So kind of how do you kind of maintain the positive aspects of that community and that neighborhood without kind of it turning over and the community members that are presently there kind of being kicked out?
Yeah.
As if availability becomes it's a commodity, right? So how is that something that's also in discussion?
You just can't avoid these topics. They're very complicated. So let me just do the language thing first. We actually just rolled out 70 small little QR code signs with information about our plants. We don't have a lot of signage. It was engineered English, Spanish, simplified Chinese from the ground up. You pick your language. I would ultimately like to have our website, our history of exploration. We have these pages for every trip that we've ever made. I'd like the page for every trip we've ever made, not only in English, but in the host country's primary language. With the gates, all 16 or whatever number of gates, we don't have any signage saying where you are. Again, if you are sort of born privileged and and you've sort of heard about this place, you just march in, right? You just ask questions. But we've got to use signage, and we can use a physical sign, but we can then pop up every language. Without having a sign that's 1 million miles high, we can have 15 languages that you have access to in every portal. So part of our gate renovations project is really about empowering people to know where they are, what's special about where they are, a little bit of the history, and coming to them with their preferred language. It doesn't matter whether they are proficient in English. It's a question of what would you prefer when I'm traveling and I go to a museum in Paris. I'm still reading all the English if I can, even if I can do French. So So that's the first, I think that's a simpler one, but it's a very important one. And again, we have an English, Spanish, and actually one of our children's educators is English, Spanish, Portuguese. So we are really trying to build up that business. Now, gentrification, I mean, I don't do policy for the city. That neighborhood is already on its way being gentrified. I mean, they're just Boston, because of the housing shortage and everything else. These are forces well beyond me. But one of the things that I find reassuring is that public housing can't be gentrified as in sold off and turned into condos. It has to, it is Boston's commitment to people in this neighborhood. So I look at this and I have to trust, and I think, you know, I look at the political spectrum. People are thinking hard. There's been a big change in I think, how the city's looking at things. I'm excited about it. People have to think hard about policy. This is everything from whether you have rent control or don't have rent control, whether you have subsidized sort of units in anything that's built, how many you have. To me, and this is not my field of expertise, that's how you think about these things, and I'm hoping the experts will come to bear. My view is that I know there will always be hundreds of families in Boston Housing Authority property 2 blocks from my entrance, and I have to get them a respectful entrance. But I do appreciate that in doing so, there are secondary and tertiary effects. And I have to hope that the city, in understanding the complexities of what happens with gentrification, is going to come up with policies that don't allow people to be forced out of the property. I can't give you that assurance though, because I think we've seen how many times in so many cities, it's almost an unstoppable force. So I wish I could be more certain, but I'm certain of one thing: the families who are under-resourced, who have so little, have one of the most beautiful green spaces in the world 2 blocks from them, and they shouldn't have to worry about broken glass and needles just to get in.
So I know we're at 2 o'clock, but I have to run to another meeting. But so let me just thank you again for coming and talking to us about this, and hopefully spurring more interaction, because it's clearly a great opportunity.
Thanks so much.
Are there questions from the our remote people?
Not yet.
I don't think so, because I think it would be in the chat
Yep.
there. So I don't see that, but I don't know whether you are is in meeting with some people now or what's.
No, we just had in here if people wanted to meet.
Got it. Well, I'll leave you in their capable hands.
Okay. That sounds great.
Thank you, Ed, and hopefully see you at the Arboretum.